Closing in on the end. Joel chapter 2, verse 28, we'll read in just a moment. We're going to look at the remnant, what that means in the Bible. And it occurred to me today, as I was finishing up this message, that our gospel message, what we preach as a church, stands out today versus 20 or 30 years ago because all of the evil elements have consolidated together. That is kind of in a nutshell what's changed in the last 3 to 4 years is these things have shaped up and have manifest, and evil has taken on form in a way that it had not before. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, there's a fascinating verse that will give us pause as we think about our times. And the children of Issachar, one of the tribes of Israel, which were men that had understanding of their times, which I take to mean most everybody else in Israel were paying no attention to their times, and they didn't know how bad things were and didn't know what to do. The children of Issachar were men that had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. So are you one of the children of Issachar? You're here tonight studying, for the most part, I would say, because you do have your head up, and you do see what's going on, and you want to know what the Bible has to say about it. So Joel chapter 2 and verse 28. Joel chapter 2, verse 28. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. What does this sound like? Acts chapter 2, Peter's sermon. These are not drunk. This is that. He referred to this passage. And also upon the servants and upon their handmaids, in those days will I pour out my spirit. I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said. And here it is, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. So there's a distinction made here between those who call upon the Lord and are saved, and this remnant which the Lord shall call. So I believe this is a reference to tribulation beginning over in the book of Revelation. That's where we're going to end up tonight. That remnant over the book of Revelation, I believe, is who Joel is talking about, who the Lord is talking about here. And the remnant is actually a thing in the Bible. Context is king. You have to know what the context is. Sometimes it's a remnant of evildoers, but most of the time it's a remnant of God's people. So I want to kind of look at that. But first, a little bit of news. This is really good news. We'll see what comes of it. There was a study released last week on gender reassignment out of the UK. This study was done by one of the top, most respected doctors in the UK. And the study was done in such a way that it's even been peer-reviewed and, they've done everything right. So there's no arguing with the science. And here's the conclusion that they came to in this study. It is irreversibly damaging children for no benefit and no science to support it. Now, Just follow the science. That's what they told us. I believe they've done some real science here. I believe that they've actually followed the scientific method and they've done it right. Have you heard about that in the news?
No.
Why? Really? Everybody else is saying the opposite. The United States is saying the complete opposite. And here they're saying, follow the science. Stop doing it. It's really good news. The United States Supreme Court announced a decision on Idaho's ban on gender-affirming care. So Idaho passed a law. It was challenged and brought to the Supreme Court. Gender-affirming care for kids is now illegal in Idaho, which sets the jurisprudence for every other state to be knocked down as well. This is really amazing. I would never have even thought this could be possible. Well, you realize that we're hanging by a thread. The Supreme Court is the only thing that stands between us and all kinds of bad stuff. And the Supreme Court is hanging by a thread because our illustrious president continues to hammer away. I'll go around the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's not the final word. We don't have to do what the Supreme Court says.
It's only that way when they disagree with him.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, they're the authority when they agree with them, sure. Yeah. A couple of items, we don't usually have good news, but these are really good news. But I want you to watch and see. I doubt if you've heard much press beyond the day it happened on the Supreme Court ruling. I didn't hear anything about it today. This is bad news, revealing 50 concert goers. Remember back on October the 7th when all that happened? Those concert goers who went to that, 50 of them committed suicide.
Should that be 2023?
Yeah, that's right. It would be 23. See, this is how you know I do my own studies because of the mistakes that are there. At any rate, this is revealing. And so they would have almost exclusively been secular Jews, which that's most of what's in Israel anyway. Faith matters. To me is the point. Faith, and not even just the Christian faith. To be able to have a faith understanding of the universe enables you to get through bad stuff. Now, obviously, a lot more if you actually have a prayer to the creator of the universe and all that. But don't misunderstand. I don't think it has to be just Christian faith. There's something in us that empowers us when we exercise our spiritual whatever. What do you think?
Repeat that again.
The whole thing. I think faith matters. I think when people have a trust in a creator, it makes it, and they've got actual statistics out. They've actually studied this. People that are in the hospital, who people they know are praying for them, they get better faster. And it doesn't have to be Christian prayer. That's the reason why I say that.
The latter part, what you said, something within you or something like that.
Yeah, everybody is designed to interact in the spiritual realm. Now, the lost person, the natural man, is a dead spirit. But even in that, when they intellectually acknowledge there is the spiritual and they lean into that in the midst of bad times, helps them. Maybe not like you and I, but statistically, they've gathered the studies that people in the hospital who have faith and know that people are praying for them, and we're talking about Jews and Muslims and Christians, when that part of them is activated, it makes a difference in their healing. Some of the YouTube videos are absolutely startling about people that are in the nursing home, Alzheimer's, they're completely out of it. And someone will begin to play on a machine music from their youth, the dance era and, that kind of music. And they just come alive. They begin to sing along.
Right.
And they had been non-responsive up to that point.
That's right.
And to me, the simple point is music is designed to be powerful at that level for everybody.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Now, it can be used, and that's how we've talked about it for the most part, it can be used in awful, terrible ways by the enemy, it can also be used greatly by God. I've got a book by Tim LaHaye on depression, and he has a whole chapter on music. And I practiced it back in the day to see some of the effects, and they're real. They're real. Christianity is a singing religion. If you don't sing, there's something messed up in your Christianity. Now, I tend to sing where people can't hear me, if I can, for obvious reasons. Now, this is a guy who I follow for a lot of prophecy news. He really does a good job of he's a retired lawyer, and he's at this church, and so I follow John Haller. Do any of you follow Tucker Carlson? Know who he is? Okay.
I don't know if I follow him.
Huh?
I
Yeah.
listen to a lot of
Yeah. Yeah. Well, after you hear this, there'll be even less reason for you to follow him. I have always known there was something not quite right about Carlson, something I didn't trust, and this just nails it. So he did an interview with, I saw this last week. This guy used it in his update, so I just grabbed it from him to save me all the work. I watched Carlson's interview with a Lutheran preacher in Bethlehem. You might remember back around Christmas time, I showed you a picture of a pastor who in his church had set up a display of rubble, bombed out type rubble, and a baby wrapped in the Palestinian scarf garb. You remember that? You know, and the whole point was Israel is killing babies. Okay, this is that pastor who Tucker interviewed and just swallowed what he said, hook, line, and sinker. Well, this pastor, now I want you to think about Bethlehem. Bethlehem is in the control of the Palestinians. Israel gave it over to the Palestinians to control. If you're going to be a pastor in Bethlehem, you're going to be pro-Palestinian or they're going to kill you. So I'm not overstating it. This is the poster boy, this guy is, for pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel pastors in Israel.
And so I want you to listen a little bit to what this interview that Tucker Carlson did with Munther Isaac from Bethlehem Bible College. He's a Lutheran pastor in Bethlehem. And this, I'm just going to play a couple minutes of it because if I play any more of it, I'll be too upset to do anything the rest of the day. This, by the way, up front, I will tell you, this is one of the most pathetic anti-Semitic interviews I have ever seen in my life. And Tucker Carlson should be ashamed of himself. Big time. Okay, here's what he says at the beginning.
A consistent but almost never noted theme of American foreign policy is that it is always the Christians who suffer. When there's a war abroad that the United States is funding, it is Christians who tend to die disproportionately. And this goes back a long way, 60 years really, to Vietnam, where Catholics in that country were massacred. But it's accelerated. So, for example, during the more than a decade the U.S. government spent occupying Iraq, the ancient Christian community of Iraq was completely devastated. 9 out of 10 of them are no longer there. They're gone. That was an effect of our foreign policy, but it was almost never noted in the United States and almost never, ever even mentioned by Christian clergy in this country, many of whom supported that war and that occupation. Why is that? Maybe because it wasn't. Virtually no one in any American church said anything when Christians were killed in Syria, very often by Islamic extremists, paid for by the United States. But nobody said anything, and anyone who did was denounced as a kook or a bigot somehow. Standing up for Christians was not allowed in the U.S. media. We saw that firsthand. And so, once again, it continued. In Ukraine, where the U.S. government has sent far more than $100 billion to the Ukrainian government, And what happened? What did that government do? Well, it banned an entire Christian denomination. The Zelensky government is busy throwing Orthodox priests and nuns in jail and having the army raid churches. But again, not a word. But what about Gaza? What about the entire region in the Middle East, where, of course, there's very intense fighting going on? Many Christian churches in the United States, particularly evangelical churches, support that. But there is virtually never a word about the Christians who live there, the ancient Christian community in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel proper. So, because no one has said a word, there has been great suffering among the Christian population in that region. In October, a Greek Orthodox church in the Gaza Strip was hit by an airstrike. We're showing the video now. The church is in ruins. At least 17 people were killed.
Okay, listen. A lot of what he just said is a complete, total propaganda lie. I'm disgusted by this. Christians care about Christians. I have Christian friends in Bethlehem. They are concerned that the Christian population, when Israel turned over control of Bethlehem to the Palestinian Authority, was about 80% Christian. Today, it's less than 10%. That has nothing to do with Israel, Tucker. Get your facts straight. Stop believing these anti-Semitic propagandistic lies. So he interviews. So Dumisani Washington wrote this article at Tablet Mag. And the title of the article is, let me go in here, The Arsonist. Bravo, Dumisani. That's why I immediately contacted him and said, I want to interview you about this. Tucker Carlson whitewashed murderers to set fire to evangelical Jewish relations. Dumisani is 100% correct on that. And don't send me any email that I misinterpret Tucker and Tucker's our ally on some things. I'm talking about this specific situation. Tucker is dead wrong. Dead wrong. It's propaganda. For example, what he said about Russia, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail about this. This notion on the right that Putin is this great Christian is just beyond my comprehension. I have evangelical pastor friends in Ukraine that I'm in regular contact with. I sent them this interview that Tucker did with Munther. They were appalled, especially the front where he says, Ukraine has shut down a Christian denomination. They have imprisoned some people from the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Why? Because they're at war with Russia and they're spies that are working for Russia. This is what happens in wars. And for Tucker to count, and by the way, you'll find more evangelical churches destroyed, people in prison in Russia-controlled areas than you will in the rest of Ukraine.
One more tidbit. Do you know who's bankrolling Tucker? Saudi Arabia investor. All right, let's talk about the biblical remnant. What is a biblical idea of a remnant? Well, the Hebrew lexicon for that word, sherith, conveys root idea of these two words, sherar, as that which is left over or has survived after a previous elimination. The remainder, the residue. That's not different from what you thought. A remnant, you think of a piece of carpet, you cut off what you use, and what's left is the remnant. But it has a little bit more of a biblical connotation in that there is a process after which the process is done, there's a remnant left. Of course, these are people. Really? An example of this would be in Ruth 1:3. It says Naomi's husband died and she was a remnant. So a process took place and she wound up a remnant. I'm trying to get you to understand the biblical concept so when we get to the remnant, it'll make more sense. Run through some examples of remnants. Enoch wasn't the only believer, but there was a process going on in the world. Enoch was just before the flood, right? And Enoch was, what happened to Enoch? He was taken. Yes. All at once he was not there. He was raptured. He is a type, a symbol in Scripture. As we look at it, we can see prophetically, this is what God does with the church before judgment is going to come. And then, of course, Noah and his family. And you've heard me say it before. I believe that Noah is a type of the believing remnant that go through the tribulation, the Jewish remnant that goes through the tribulation. In Genesis 19, we have Lot. So there was a process that went through, and at the end of it, there wasn't very many saved. Lot and his 2 daughters. The wife, she didn't make it. She's still over there standing up as a pillar of salt. The selection of David, you remember how he was selected as king. This is that process, the idea of a remnant. 1 Samuel 16:11, there remains yet the youngest, whereby Jesse informs Samuel that the prophet has examined every one of his sons except this remnant, this one that remains after everybody else has been eliminated. That's the concept of a remnant. Those who finally entered the promised land, how few in number was that group as compared with all of those who came out of Israel, and then for 40 years they wandered in the wilderness. So the ones who wound up going into the promised land was a remnant after a process of elimination. That was a remnant. Schofield has this note about the idea of a remnant. He writes, what? Yeah. Schofield writes that one key to unlocking prophecy is a proper understanding of the doctrine of the remnant, which he summarizes as follows. In the history of Israel, a remnant may be discerned, a spiritual Israel within the national Israel. In Elijah's time, 7,000 had not bowed the knee to Baal, 1 Kings 19:18. In Isaiah's time, it was the very small remnant for whose sake God still forbore to destroy the nation, Isaiah 1:9. During the captivities, the remnant appears in Jews like Ezekiel, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Esther, Mordecai. At the end of the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, it was the remnant which returned under Ezra and Nehemiah. At the advent of our Lord, John the Baptist, Simeon, Anna, and them that looked for the redemption of Jerusalem, Luke 2:38, were the remnant. During the Great Tribulation, a remnant out of all Israel will turn to Jesus as Messiah. And if we have the time, which we won't, Revelation gives us several indicators of these. Some of these will undergo martyrdom. Some will be spared to enter the millennial kingdom. Many of the Psalms express prophetically the joys and sorrows of the tribulation remnant. Most of you probably know about this vicious cycle that occurred during the Judges era. In the Judges era, this happened repeatedly, over and over, time and time again. There was peace in the land. Israel serves the Lord, but then they're on the left, the right. My right. Your left? Okay. Israel does evil in the eyes of the Lord, and that goes down. God punishes Israel. Israel is enslaved to their enemies. Israel, at the bottom of it, cries out to the Lord. God sends a judge. Israel is delivered, and the cycle starts over again. Now, I bring that up because this basic principle, the second law of spiritual dynamics, if you will, The second law of thermodynamics means everything is in the process of deterioration. Well, spiritually, that's true too. And the only thing that changes that up is a revival or some crisis. Well, so every one of the 7 dispensations, right? So Adam and Eve had a dispensation, a contract with God. And then there was the contract with them after the fall. And then there was Noah. And then there was Abraham. And there was Israel. And there is the church. So there's 7 dispensations, according to Schofield, and I agree with him. The significant thing is every dispensation ended in man's apostasy. This one, we see it happening right now. The last one, the millennial reign of Christ, how does that end? Satan is loose for a season and gathers a remnant, if you will, and will oppose God, and God will finally put it down. So every dispensation ends in man being apostasy, in apostasy. And you can see a perfect example, maybe the most glaring example is before God calls Abraham, you have the Tower of Babel. So God says, okay, fine, good luck with that. And he calls somebody out, Abraham. So yeah, you can call it a remnant at the end of it, each one. God's never done. He always has a remnant. Well, and they're in the minority. You know, most of our nation, man, even most of what calls itself church is not church anymore. And there's bizarre things happening in churches all across America. I was watching a video this week of some of the bizarre stuff going on in American churches. There's this mega church, and the pastor for Easter had a great big giant trampoline kind of a thing. And he was jumping and doing flips. That was center stage.
That was spiritual.
They have to be entertained.
When are you going to do a flip?
I was gonna say.
He
I'm
did.
looking for that
No,
dream.
when are you going to do one?
Well,
Daughter, behave yourself.
I'm actually saved, so that's probably never going to happen.